During the most recent episode of Real Time with Bill Maher, the controversial comedian and political commentator grilled one of his guests, a Trump-voting Fox News host, about the asymmetry between the two parties when it comes to accepting the outcome of free and fair elections. And when that guest predictably tried to peddle false equivalences, Bill Maher shut her down. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, we got a clip to look at here from the most recent episode of Real Time with Bill Maher. Typically, Bill Maher would have already ended the season, but because he expected Vice President Kamala Harris would win and there would be post-election drama with Donald Trump and his supporters throwing a tantrum, he actually extended the season by 2 episodes. And so now they're dealing with the aftermath of Donald Trump's disastrous victory. And Bill Maher feels the need, rightly so, in my opinion, to drive home the point that the Democrats are morally superior when it comes to accepting free and fair elections and democracy, and juxtaposing the behavior of President Biden with the authoritarian impulses of Donald Trump. And Mary Katharine Ham, who has regularly appeared on Real Time with Bill Maher, and she's a Fox News contributor, she tries to create a false equivalence, even though she indicates somewhat, she recognizes that Trump is a lot worse on this, but she has to muddy the waters. She has to try to muddy the waters in order to defend Trump somewhat.
This is already something that has passed us to the point where we're not the country we should be or we used to be. Now, you voted for Trump. Tell me why this is okay with you.
Well, genuine thank you to Biden and Harris for doing what they should do, right?
That he didn't do, Trump.
Yes, and Biden is, by the way, I'm not sure he knows he's in the room with Hitler, but he gets half credit for doing this peacefully, right? But I think there's
So even right off the bat, so full disclosure, Mary Katharine Ham, we've actually discussed her in previous videos. She is not the most deranged Trump supporter you will find on the Fox Propaganda Network, but even there, right? So she's like, credit to Biden and Harris for doing what they should do, implying that Biden and Harris alone have an obligation to observe the peaceful transfer of power. She should have said, credit to Biden and Harris for doing what every incumbent administration should do, which is observe the peaceful transfer of power that Donald Trump didn't do. Credit to them and no credit to Trump. As a matter of fact, Trump gets a demerit because he didn't do what he should have done. But instead, she has to pitch it as though the burden is exclusively on the Democrats and that Trump gets to do whatever the hell he wants. And so when Bill Maher has to remind her, well, wait a minute, Trump didn't do it. Yeah, sure. But okay, now Biden gets half credit because we don't know if he knew he was in the room with Hitler. Of course, a reference to all the times that Democrats have referred correctly to Trump as a fascist, echoing sentiments from many senior staff who worked for Donald Trump. People like Chief of Staff John Kelly, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Mark Milley, former Secretary of Defense James Mattis, all of whom have referred to Donald Trump as a fascist. Mary Katharine, if you're watching, like and subscribe, but take it up with people who know Trump a hell of a lot better than you.
another thing here. We had a contest in democracy by listening to the voters about what they cared about most. And I think one of the issues with voters was that making January 6th, 9/11, making that day into everything, did not win that fight. It didn't win the fight about what they cared about most. There were other things in their personal lives.
That's not what I'm asking. What I'm asking is, that if Trump had lost this election, right now, we would be talking about the votes that are still coming in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, and he'd be in the courts, and we would just be all in a tizzy. One side accepts election losses and one side doesn't. This asymmetry cannot continue.
Wait, and the people who
So, and again, I find this so interesting. So Mary Katharine says, and by the way, this is the interesting thing about Trump supporters. They're the same people who say, we're not a democracy, we're a republic. Screw majority rule, screw majority votes. Then, of course, the first time that Donald Trump actually wins a popular vote, and I should note, by the way, that Donald Trump's popular vote margin continues to shrink. He hasn't even won the majority of votes. He is now at a plurality, because if you take the number of votes for people who voted third party, or did a write-in and combine them with the number of people who voted for Vice President Harris, Donald Trump isn't in the majority. They are in the majority. He merely has a plurality of the votes. So again, also keep that in mind when people like Mary Katharine Ham and others suggest that Donald Trump either won in a landslide or has some sort of popular vote mandate, a logic that they never ascribed to Democrats when Democrats won the popular vote and the Electoral College vote decisively by greater margins than Donald Trump did. Again, note the asymmetry. That's all they can do. They can only win by employing asymmetry. They can only win elections that way. They can only win arguments that way by holding themselves to different standards.
Or defending it cannot just look past it like, well, we won the election, so that's it.
Well, Currently, Bob Casey, Democratic senator in Pennsylvania, is doing exactly what you're saying, where he's looking for all these votes and and the Bucks County commissioners are saying, we need fake ones. We need to get all the ones that are unregistered.
No, they're just counting them.
No, that's not actually true.
They're just counting them.
It's not actually true. And if you dismiss that and you don't recognize the mote in your own eye, then that is a problem.
So you're saying Bob Casey in this, that's equivalent to Trump in 2020?
No, I don't say they're equivalent. I say that you have to recognize that these things happen. For instance, in 2016 and 2000.
No, they didn't. No, they didn't.
No, they didn't. So again, Mary Katharine Ham, not the most deranged Trump supporter by any stretch of the imagination, but she wants to pivot to Bob Casey, the incumbent Democratic senator who will very likely lose. I mean, it's already been projected that he's lost. And once the final votes are tabulated, it's still very likely that he will lose the seat of Pennsylvania, against Republican challenger Dave McCormick. At the time of recording this, there are about 85,000 votes still waiting to be counted. And the delta between McCormick and Casey is about 25,000 votes. So in theory, once all the votes are tabulated, it is possible that Casey will emerge in the lead. Very unlikely to do so. And once those votes are tabulated, Bob Casey, I believe, will formally concede. And if he doesn't, he deserves all the criticism in the world, because that is disgusting, because Democrats and Republicans should concede elections. However, Mary Katharine Ham is conflating Bob Casey demanding that all the votes be counted with Donald Trump as the sitting president of the United States in 2020, not simply waiting for all the votes to be counted, which would be fine. Instead, he declared himself the winner the night of the election before all the votes were counted. Now, that is completely different from what Bob Casey has done. And the level of responsibility that Donald Trump had as the sitting president of the United States is far greater than any Republican or Democratic senator to begin with. So again, total asymmetry here. If Bob Casey came out on election night and said, we won, stop the count, we won, then I would agree that that's pretty disgusting. It still wouldn't be as bad as what Trump did, because Trump was the president at the time, and the president is more powerful than a single U.S. senator, and therefore has more responsibility than a single U.S. senator, but it would still be abhorrent. But that's not what Bob Casey has done. And so then, once Bill Maher says, no, he's just waiting for the votes to be counted, then she tries to pivot to 2016 and 2000. So in 2000, Vice President Al Gore lost the state of Florida at the time, as of the final recount, by 500 votes, 500. He lost a presidential election by the time of the final permitted recount under the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court of the United States in Bush v. Gore effectively told Florida, stop recounting, stop it. Was at the time of the final recount, it was a margin of 500 votes. Did Gore immediately concede? No, he asked for recounts. But when the Supreme Court stepped in and said the recounts are done, do you know what Al Gore did? He dropped all of his lawsuits. He formally, publicly conceded. And as the sitting vice president of the United States on January 6, 2001, he presided over his own defeat. He had the gavel in his hand. He didn't scheme with President Clinton, the incumbent Democratic president, to send fake electors to Washington, D.C. He didn't foment an insurrection against the United States Capitol to prevent President-elect Bush from taking office. Total asymmetry. The moral inferiority of elected Republicans on this issue is beyond question. And Mary Katharine Ham is clever, right? And again, she's not the most deranged Republican. So when Bill Maher presses her on this, you can't be saying that these are equivalent. She's like, no, I'm not saying they're equivalent. But she won't bring herself to say, no, Bill, of course not. I want to be very clear for the record. What Donald Trump did was a league apart. What he did was infinitely more egregious than anything that I believe has been done by Bob Casey or Al Gore or Hillary Clinton. But she can't do that. She has to muddy the waters in order to morally justify Trump, in order to morally defend Trump in a debate. I'll also remind you, since she mentioned 2016, again, Hillary Clinton conceded the night of the election. And in the early hours of the next morning, she gave a public speech to her supporters and said that she called Donald Trump, conceded the election, and she's conceding the election formally and publicly. She didn't try to sue her way into the White House. She didn't demand audits and recounts. She didn't scheme with then Vice President Joe Biden and then President Barack Obama to thwart Donald Trump's victory. She didn't foment an insurrection. She didn't send fake electors. This is the issue that people listen. Mary Katharine Ham can say there was an election and people weighed these issues against what they felt was more, a more immediate, more proximate economic concerns, and concerns about democracy were found wanting. She's free to make that case. But to suggest that there's an equivalence or a comparability between the two parties, that there's not an asymmetry on this issue, and then to lecture Bill Maher, you need to look at the mote in your eye. She's, of course, making a biblical reference there about how you should, cleanse the mote in your eye before pointing out the plank in others. But what she doesn't realize is she is the one with the plank in her eye. So let's follow the logic. Basically, if the biblical idea is, if you have sinned or if you are flawed, you should work on correcting your own flaws before pointing out the flaws in others. Okay, that's fine. But Mary Katharine Ham is doing the same thing, and her flaws are bigger. What that biblical verse doesn't mean that the person with the log in their eye needs to be pointing out the mote in the other person's eye, because the same logic applies to them, and they're even worse. If the person with a moat shouldn't be criticizing, then the person with the log has even less credibility on the issue. And that's precisely what she's doing. So she's even butchering theology to try to make her point. This is what MAGA Republicans do. Even the ones who are not as deranged, like, again, Mary Katharine Ham. They can only function in a world where the Republicans, and Donald Trump in particular, are held to a different standard, where they are graded on a curve. And it's ridiculous. And Bill Maher has some terrible takes about culture. And I think he is too fixated on niche culture war issues. He's too centristy in that regard for me. But when it comes to electoral politics, he is right on the money in terms of pointing out the flaws of the Republican Party and refusing to indulge the false equivalences. And I hope as we go into this next Trump term, he continues to stay rooted on principle in that respect and refuses to indulge that sort of nonsense, even from his friends and even from his frequent guests like Mary Katharine Ham. Food for thought. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.